Screaming filled the cramped apartment as another heavy blow landed. Coughing violently, clutching her shattered side, she dragged herself into the bathroom and bolted the door. With trembling, bruised fingers, she frantically texted her best friend for help. But a single mistyped digit sent her plea directly to the city's most dangerous crime lord. Rain lashed against the single, grime-streaked window of the fourth-floor apartment in South Boston, but the sound of the storm was entirely drowned out by the chaotic violence erupting inside. Clarice Sinclair collapsed against the edge of the cheap Formica kitchen counter, her breath hitching as a blinding, white-hot agony flared through her left side. She tasted copper. Her vision swam with dark spots, the poorly lit room spinning out of focus. Standing over her, breathing heavily and reeking of stale whiskey and blind rage, was Derek Hayes. "Look what you made me do, Clarice!" Derek roared, running a hand through his disheveled blonde hair. He kicked a shattered ceramic dining plate across the linoleum floor, the sharp fragments skittering against the baseboards. "If you had just kept your mouth shut about the missing money, none of this would be happening. You push and you push." Clarice couldn't speak. She tried to draw a breath to defend herself, to plead with him to stop, but her lungs refused to expand. Every fractional movement sent a horrifying, grinding sensation through her ribcage. He had kicked her, hard. With the steel-toed work boots he wore to his construction site, she knew with terrifying certainty that something inside her had snapped. The ribs were broken, and the agonizing pressure in her chest made her fear one had punctured a lung. "Derek, please," she managed to wheeze, her voice a fragile, broken rasp. "Shut up!" he screamed, taking a threatening step forward. "Just shut up! I need to think. You're always ruining everything." He turned his back for a fraction of a second to grab the half-empty bottle of bourbon resting on the coffee table. It was her only chance. Adrenaline, primitive and desperate, flooded her system, temporarily overriding the agonizing pain. Clarice scrambled backward, her hands slipping on the damp linoleum, and threw her weight toward the narrow hallway. She lunged into the tiny windowless bathroom and slammed the hollow wooden door shut, blindly pawing at the deadbolt until it clicked into place. An instant later, Derek's full weight slammed against the wood. The doorframe groaned, dust raining down from the ceiling. "Open the door, Clarice," he bellowed, his fists pounding a terrifying rhythm against the flimsy barrier. "Open it right now, or I swear to God, when I get in there, it's going to be 10 times worse." Clarice clamped a hand over her mouth to muffle her sobs, sinking to the cold tile floor. She curled her knees to her chest, trying to protect her shattered side. Her purse had been thrown into the bathtub earlier that morning during his first tirade. With agonizing slowness, she reached over the porcelain edge and dragged the leather bag down, her trembling hands digging blindly inside until her fingers brushed the cold glass of her smartphone. She had to text Amanda. Amanda Riley, her co-worker at the dental clinic, lived just 3 streets over on Maple Avenue. Amanda had a car. Amanda knew about Derek's temper, even if she didn't know the full, horrifying extent of it. Her tears blurred the glowing screen. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold the device. She bypassed her contacts, the screen lagging, and hurriedly tapped in Amanda's number from memory. 555-0198. She didn't notice that her thumb, slick with cold sweat, had slipped. She hadn't typed 0189. Fighting unconsciousness, she typed a frantic, desperate message. "He broke my ribs. I can't breathe. Please help me, Amanda. He's going to kill me. 402 West Oak Street, Apt 4B. Hurry." She hit send. Outside the door, the pounding stopped, replaced by an eerie, terrifying silence. Then came the sound of metal scraping. Derek had gone to the kitchen for something, a screwdriver or a knife. He was going to take the door off its hinges, or he was going to pry the lock open. Message delivered. The screen flashed in the dim, flickering light of the bathroom. Clarice closed her eyes, resting her forehead against the cool porcelain of the bathtub. "Please," she prayed to a god she hadn't spoken to in years. "Please let her be awake. Please let her come." Across the city, in the penthouse suite of the Obsidian Lounge, the atmosphere was freezing, suffocatingly tense. The sprawling office smelled of rich mahogany, aged scotch, and the distinct metallic tang of fear. Dominic Russo sat behind a massive desk carved from a single slab of black marble. At 34, Dominic was the undisputed head of the Russo syndicate, a ghost to the authorities and a nightmare to his rivals. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that betrayed no bulk, though everyone in the room knew he was armed. His dark eyes, devoid of any discernible emotion, were fixed on the man trembling in the leather chair opposite him. "Let me understand this, Leo," Dominic said, his voice a low, terrifyingly calm baritone that commanded absolute silence in the room. "You thought you could reroute 3 shipments through the docks, pocket a 20% margin, and I simply wouldn't notice?" Leo Vane, a mid-level lieutenant with a penchant for expensive suits he couldn't afford, was sweating profusely. "Boss, I swear, it was a clerical error. The manifest." "Silvio," Dominic interrupted, not raising his voice. Silvio, a towering enforcer standing in the shadows by the door, took 1 step forward. That single step was enough to make Leo whimper. Before Dominic could issue the final order that would end Leo's life, a sharp, discreet vibration interrupted the silence. Dominic paused. He reached into his inner breast pocket and pulled out a sleek, encrypted burner phone. Only 3 people possessed this number: his underboss, his international supplier, and his attorney. If this phone was ringing, the world was either ending or someone was dead. He unlocked the screen, his dark brows knitting together in a rare display of confusion. It wasn't a contact. It was an unknown number. "He broke my ribs. I can't breathe. Please help me, Amanda. He's going to kill me. 402 West Oak Street, Apt 4B. Hurry." Dominic stared at the glowing pixels. A wrong number. A desperate, bleeding woman reaching out into the void and accidentally dialing the devil instead of her savior. Normally, Dominic would delete the message and toss the phone. The affairs of civilians were entirely beneath him. They were noise. But something about the raw, visceral desperation in the text, the mention of broken ribs, the terrifying certainty of impending death, struck a buried, volatile chord deep within his chest. Perhaps it was a dark reminder of his own mother, who had died on a kitchen floor 20 years ago while her husband stood over her. An event that had birthed the monster Dominic was today. Leo watched, terrified, as the air around the Mafia boss seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Dominic's jaw clenched. His thumb moved over the keyboard. "Who is this?" Miles away in the dark bathroom, Clarice's phone buzzed in her hand. She gasped, quickly illuminating the screen. But the response made her blood run cold. "Who is this?" Tears streamed down her bruised cheeks. No. She had messed up. She checked the number at the top of the screen and realized her fatal error. She was completely alone. Derek had returned to the door. The sharp edge of a flathead screwdriver began biting into the wood near the deadbolt, splintering it. Desperate, out of her mind with pain and terror, she typed back anyway, hoping against hope that whoever held the phone possessed a shred of humanity. "Please, I typed the wrong number. He's breaking the door down. I can't breathe. Please call the police. 402 West Oak Street, Apt 4B. Tell them he's going to kill me." Back in the penthouse, Dominic read the second message. He stared at the address, West Oak Street. That was in the Barrens, a rundown district tightly controlled by a small-time street crew that paid him taxes. It was exactly 8 minutes away from his current location if he drove like a madman. Dominic didn't call the police. The police were slow. The police asked questions. He stood up abruptly, the leather of his chair creaking. The sudden movement made Leo flinch violently, throwing his hands up over his face. But Dominic didn't even look at the traitor. His dark eyes were fixed on the city skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, rain lashing against the reinforced glass. He looked down at the phone and typed a 3-word response that would alter the course of both their lives forever. "Wait right there." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and grabbed his heavy wool overcoat from the mahogany stand. "Boss?" Silvio asked, his deep voice rumbling with confusion. "What about Leo?" "Lock him in the basement. Break his fingers so he can't try anything clever," Dominic ordered coldly, buttoning his coat. "Dante, Silvio, you're with me. Bring the heavy hardware." "Where are we going, boss?" Dante asked, already checking the magazine of his sidearm. "Is it a hit?" Dominic stalked toward the private elevator, his face an impenetrable mask of lethal intent. "No. We're going to West Oak Street. Someone is damaging property in my city without my permission." Inside apartment 4B, the wood of the bathroom door gave a sickening crack. The tip of the screwdriver broke through the paneling, inches from Clarice's face. She screamed, a pathetic wheezing sound that tore at her broken ribs, and scrambled into the corner of the bathtub, making herself as small as possible. Her phone buzzed one last time. She looked through her blurry, tear-filled vision at the bright screen. Wait right there. She didn't know if it was a threat, a cruel joke, or a promise. Gotcha, you little bitch, Derek snarled from the other side. With a violent kick, the weakened wood splintered around the deadbolt, and the bathroom door flew open, rebounding off the tiled wall with a deafening crash. Derek stood in the doorway, chest heaving, a piece of the broken doorframe in one hand. His eyes were wide, manic, completely devoid of reason. He stepped into the tiny room, his heavy boots crunching on the fallen wood splinters. "Did you really think a piece of wood was going to stop me?" he hissed, dropping the wood and reaching down to grab her by the hair. Clarice squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the final blow. But it never came. Instead, a sound echoed from the living room that made Derek freeze. It wasn't the sound of a police siren or a neighbor knocking. It was the unmistakable, terrifying sound of the apartment's heavy steel front door being violently kicked completely off its hinges, hitting the floorboards with a concussive boom that shook the entire building. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, not the frantic rush of cops, but the calm, measured tread of predators, entered the apartment. "Derek Hayes," a voice called out from the living room. It was a voice that commanded absolute obedience, smooth as silk but laced with a lethal, terrifying promise. "Step out of the bathroom, slowly." Derek froze, the splintered wood slipping from his slack grip and clattering against the tile. The sheer, overwhelming aura of menace radiating from the living room paralyzed him. Slowly, he backed out of the bathroom, his previous bravado evaporating into thin air. Standing in the center of the cramped, trashed living room were three men in impeccably tailored suits. They looked entirely out of place in the rundown Baron's apartment, yet they commanded the space as if they owned the very building. Flanking the door were two behemoths, Dante and Silvio, their hands resting casually inside their unbuttoned suit jackets. But it was the man in the center who made Derek's stomach plummet. Dominic Russo, the ghost of the Boston underworld. Derek had seen him exactly once, from a terrified distance at a subterranean card game 2 years ago. "Mr. Russo," Derek stammered, his voice jumping an octave. He raised his hands, completely forgetting the battered woman cowering in the bathroom behind him. I didn't know you owned this building. I pay my rent to the O'Malley crew, I swear." Dominic didn't look at Derek. He slowly pulled off his leather gloves, slipping them into his overcoat pocket. His dark, impenetrable gaze swept over the shattered plates, the overturned coffee table, and finally rested on the splintered bathroom doorframe. "You are making an excessive amount of noise, Derek," Dominic said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried the devastating weight of a judge passing a final sentence. "And you are damaging something that does not belong to you." "She's my girlfriend," Derek protested weakly, a desperate whine creeping into his tone. "We were just having a disagreement, a misunderstanding." Dominic tilted his head a fraction of an inch. Silvio stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Derek in 2 massive strides. Before Derek could even register the movement, Silvio drove a brutal practice punch into Derek's solar plexus. All the air left Derek's lungs in a violent rush, and he collapsed to his knees, gasping like a fish out of water. "Remove him from my sight," Dominic instructed coldly. "Take him to the warehouse by the docks. I have questions for him later." Dante and Silvio grabbed Derek by the armpits, hauling him up and dragging him toward the ruined doorway. Derek tried to kick, tried to scream, but Dante casually pressed the cold steel barrel of a suppressed pistol against his ribs, silencing him instantly. Dominic waited until the heavy footsteps faded down the stairwell. The apartment fell into a suffocating, echoing silence, broken only by the sound of rain hammering against the glass and the ragged, agonizing wheezing coming from the bathroom. He stepped over the debris, his polished Oxford shoes making no sound, and approached the doorway. Clarice was pressed against the furthest corner of the bathtub, her knees pulled to her chest, trembling so violently she looked as though she were freezing to death. Her face was a canvas of fresh bruises, and her left arm was clamped protectively over her ribs. She looked up at him, her wide, tear-filled green eyes darting over his towering frame. She expected the devil. She expected a monster. But as Dominic looked down at her, the lethal, terrifying mask he wore for the world fractured just a fraction. "Amanda?" Clarice rasped, her voice completely broken. Her fever-addled brain was struggling to comprehend the situation. "No," Dominic replied softly, crouching down so his immense height wouldn't intimidate her further. He kept his hands visible, resting them on his knees. "Amanda didn't get your message, Clarice. You sent it to me." Clarice squeezed her eyes shut, a fresh wave of tears spilling over her cheeks. The pain in her chest was becoming unbearable. The edges of her vision were turning gray. Are you going to kill me?" "I am not in the business of harming women," Dominic stated. He slowly removed his heavy charcoal wool overcoat. "My name is Dominic. I am going to pick you up now. It is going to hurt, but I need to get you to a doctor. Do you understand?" Clarice couldn't speak. She just managed a tiny, pathetic nod. Dominic draped his warm overcoat over her trembling shoulders. Then, with surprising gentleness for a man whose hands had ended lives, he slid one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back, carefully avoiding her injured side. He lifted her effortlessly. A sharp, breathless cry escaped Clarice's lips as her broken ribs shifted. Her head fell heavily against Dominic's shoulder, the scent of expensive cologne and petrichor enveloping her. "Hold on," Dominic murmured, his jaw tight as he carried her out of the nightmare. "You're safe now." As he carried her down the 4 flights of stairs to the waiting bulletproof SUV, Clarice finally allowed the darkness to claim her, slipping into unconsciousness against the chest of the most dangerous man in the city. Clarice awoke to the rhythmic, soothing beep of a heart monitor. The blinding white lights of a hospital did not greet her. Instead, she found herself surrounded by the muted elegance of a sprawling, dimly lit bedroom. The walls were painted a deep slate gray, and rain pattered softly against a massive floor-to-ceiling window that offered a dizzying view of the Boston skyline. She was lying in a king-size bed, swathed in silk sheets that felt like cool water against her skin. She tried to sit up, but a sharp, localized pain in her ribs quickly reminded her of reality. She hissed, dropping back onto the plush pillows. "I wouldn't advise moving, Miss Sinclair." A calm, clinical voice spoke from the corner of the room. Clarice turned her head, wincing. Sitting in a leather armchair was an older man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, reading a tablet. He wore a crisp, white, button-down shirt and a neutral expression. Where am I?" Clarice asked, her throat incredibly dry. The man stood up, pouring a glass of water from a crystal pitcher on the nightstand and handing it to her with a straw. "You are in a secure, private residence. I am Dr. Harrison Cole. I used to be the chief of surgery at Massachusetts General before taking a private commission. You have 3 fractured ribs, severe contusions, and you are severely dehydrated. I've wrapped your torso and administered a cocktail of painkillers and anti-inflammatories." Clarice took a tentative sip of the water. Her memory flooded back in broken fragments. The fight, the bathroom, the terrifying text message, the man in the tailored suit who carried her out. "Where is he?" she asked quietly. "The man who brought me here." The heavy mahogany door to the bedroom clicked open before Dr. Cole could answer. Dominic Russo stepped into the room. He had changed out of his suit and was now wearing a dark turtleneck and black slacks, yet he looked no less imposing. He nodded at the doctor. "Give us a minute, Harrison," Dominic said. Dr. Cole gathered his tablet and medical bag, slipping quietly out of the room and closing the door with a solid, heavy thud. Dominic approached the foot of the bed, his dark eyes locking onto hers. In the quiet lighting of the room, Clarice could see the sharp, aristocratic lines of his jaw and the cold calculation in his stare. Yet, he didn't look angry. He looked entirely in control. "How are you feeling, Clarice?" he asked, his baritone voice sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. "Like I got hit by a truck," she admitted softly. She gripped the edge of the silk duvet. "Why did you bring me here? Who are you?" "My name is Dominic Russo," he said, watching her carefully for a reaction. Clarice's breath hitched. She wasn't involved in the criminal underworld, but living in Boston, you heard whispers. Russo. The syndicate that controlled the ports, the underground casinos, the unions. She had accidentally texted a mafia boss. I should go," she stammered, fighting through the pain to push the covers off. "I have to go home." "No, I can't go home. I need to go to Amanda's." "You are not going anywhere," Dominic interrupted. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of absolute fact. He walked to the side of the bed and gently but firmly placed a hand on her uninjured shoulder, pushing her back against the pillows. Derek Hayes is currently residing in a soundproof room in one of my warehouses. During our conversation, he mentioned something very interesting, Clarice, something that concerns me directly. Clarice's heart pounded against her fractured ribs. I don't know anything about his business. I swear, I work at a dental clinic. I just wanted to leave him. Before he attacked you, Derek was screaming about missing money, Dominic continued, his eyes narrowing slightly. He was turning your apartment upside down looking for it. Tell me about the money. Clarice swallowed hard. He's a gambler. He owed people. Last week he brought home a black duffel bag. He hid it in the air vent in the hallway. I found it when I was cleaning. It was filled with stacks of $100 bills. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. I asked him about it, and he went crazy. He took it away. But a few days later, he started tearing the place apart, claiming, I stole part of it. Dominic's expression darkened. He pulled his phone from his pocket. Dante, go back to the West Oak apartment, tear out the hallway air vent, look for a false back, bring me whatever is inside. He hung up without waiting for a response. He looked back at Clarice, his posture rigid. That money didn't belong to Derek. It belonged to Vincent Costa. Costa is a rival who has been trying to move in on my territory for 6 months. Derek was holding it for him, moving it through his construction sites to launder it. Clarice felt the blood drain from her face. Costa, I don't care about any of this. Please, just let me leave. You don't understand, Dominic said, leaning closer. The scent of his cologne washed over her again, dangerously intoxicating. Costa's men are looking for Derek. When they find out Derek is missing, they will go to that apartment. They will find your neighbors, and they will find out you were taken by my men. You are no longer just a civilian, Clarice. You are the only link to $500,000 of cartel money and a direct connection to a war I am about to start. And about money, so what does that mean? She whispered, tears of exhaustion springing to her eyes again. Dominic's gaze softened, a fleeting, almost imperceptible shift in his armor. He looked at her bruised face, the vulnerability in her wide eyes, and felt an unfamiliar, fierce possessiveness grip his chest. He had brought her here to interrogate her, to use her as leverage. But looking at her now, he knew he couldn't let her walk out into the crossfire. It means, Dominic said, his voice dropping to a low, resonant murmur, that until this is resolved, you belong to me. You stay in this penthouse. You are under my protection. If Vincent Costa wants to get to you, he has to go through me. Clarice stared at him, trapped in a gilded cage built by a monster, realizing with terrifying clarity that the safest place in the world was right beside the devil himself. Over the next 2 weeks, the sprawling penthouse overlooking the Charles River transformed from a gilded cage into a sanctuary under Dr. Cole's meticulous care. Clarice's ribs began to knit together, and the severe bruising faded into dull, yellowish shadows. Yet, the physical healing was nothing compared to the profound shift in her reality. She lived in a world of muted luxury and constant, quiet surveillance. Dominic Russo was not the chaotic, screaming monster Derek had been. Dominic was a glacier cold, immovable, and devastatingly powerful. He spent hours in his home office, orchestrating a shadow war across Boston, but he always made time to eat dinner with her. He never raised his voice. He never touched her without her implicit, silent permission. It was a terrifying realization for Clarice. The most dangerous man she had ever met made her feel infinitely safer than she ever had in her normal life. The magnetic pull between them was undeniable. It hung in the air heavy with unspoken promises. When Dominic looked at her, his dark eyes stripped away her defenses, seeing past the bruised, broken woman to the survivor underneath. He bought her clothes, cashmere sweaters, and silk loungewear, and replaced her shattered phone with a state-of-the-art device, though its outgoing calls were heavily restricted. "You're quiet tonight," Dominic observed one evening, pouring a glass of Macallan 18 single malt scotch. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights reflecting off his sharp jawline. Clarice pulled her knees up on the velvet sofa, careful of her side. "I'm thinking about Amanda, my friend from the clinic. I haven't shown up to work in 2 weeks. She must think I'm dead. She knew how volatile Derek was. If I could just call her to tell her I'm safe. Dominic's hand paused on the crystal decanter. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. He set the glass down and turned to face her, his expression utterly unreadable. Dante pulled the duffel bag out of your air vent on the night I brought you here, Dominic said, his voice a low, smooth rumble. There was exactly $450,000 inside, marked cartel bills. Vincent Costa's money. I told you I didn't know anything about it, Clarice replied, a spike of anxiety piercing her chest. I know you didn't, Dominic said, walking slowly toward the sofa. He sat on the heavy oak coffee table directly in front of her, leaning forward, resting his forearms on his knees. But I had my men dig into how Derek, a low-level, incompetent construction worker with a gambling addiction, managed to get his hands on Costa's primary laundering cash. Derek didn't steal it. He was a mule. Someone handed it to him to hold because they knew he lived in a blind spot in the Barrens. Clarice frowned, confusion knitting her brows. Who? Dominic pulled a sleek black tablet from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table between them. He tapped the screen, bringing up a series of high-resolution surveillance photographs. Clarice gasped. The photos showed Amanda, her best friend, the woman she had desperately texted for help sitting in a high-end booth at the Azure nightclub. She was pressed intimately against a man with a scarred cheek and a heavy gold chain. That man, Dominic explained coldly, is Tommy the Rat Puzo. He is Vincent Costa's right-hand lieutenant, the man who handles the cartel drops. Clarice's hands began to shake. No, that doesn't make sense. Amanda works at the dental clinic with me. Amanda is a facilitator, Dominic corrected gently, though his eyes remained hard. She finds desperate, stupid men like Derek and uses them to store dirty money for Tommy Puzo. She skims a percentage off the top. Derek panicked because he dipped into the bag to pay off a bookie, and he knew Puzo would kill him for it. He blamed you to cover his own tracks. Tears welled in Clarice's eyes as the horrifying truth locked into place. The night he was beating me. The night he broke my ribs. You texted Amanda for help. Dominic finished for her, his voice devoid of mercy for the woman in the photograph. My men intercepted her phone records this morning. She received your message, Clarice. You typed the right number the first time. But she ignored it. She knew Derek was unstable. If he killed you, there would be no witnesses to the duffel bag in the vent. She was going to let you die to protect her payout. A sob tore from Clarice's throat. The ultimate betrayal. The only person she thought she could trust had left her to be slaughtered. Dominic reached out, his large, calloused hand gently cupping her jaw, wiping away a tear with his thumb. The touch was electric, anchoring her to the present. You texted her first, and when she abandoned you, fate made your finger slip. You texted me, you are under my protection now, Clarice. Which means anyone who hurts you or leaves you to die answers to the Russo Syndicate. Before Clarice could process the lethal promise in his words, the heavy oak doors of the penthouse opened. Silvio walked in, his massive frame filling the entryway. He wasn't alone. Struggling and sobbing, dragged by her upper arms, was Amanda Riley. Let me go! You can't do this! Amanda shrieked, her designer heels scraping uselessly against the polished hardwood floors. Silvio dropped her in the center of the living room, where she collapsed in a pathetic heap, her expensive mascara running down her face. She looked up, freezing when she saw Dominic Russo's terrifying silhouette. Then, her eyes shifted to the sofa. Clarice? Amanda whispered, her face draining of all color. Oh my God, Clarice, you're alive. They took me off the street. You have to tell them I'm your friend. You have to tell them to let me go. Clarice stood up slowly, clutching the cashmere sweater around her healing ribs. She looked down at the woman she had shared lunches with, the woman she had confided in about Derek's abuse. She felt nothing but a cold, hollow emptiness. I sent you a text, Amanda, Clarice said, her voice eerily calm, echoing the icy demeanor of the Mafia boss standing beside her. I told you he broke my ribs. I told you he was going to kill me. Why didn't you call the police? Amanda stammered, her eyes darting frantically between Clarice and the heavily armed enforcers by the door. My phone died. I swear, Clarice, I didn't see it until the next morning. When I went to the apartment, it was trashed and you were gone. Dominic didn't say a word. He simply tapped the tablet on the table, playing an audio recording of a wiretap. "Yeah, Tommy, it's Amanda. Listen, the idiot boyfriend is losing his mind. He's tearing the apartment apart looking for the missing 20 grand. His girlfriend is texting me for help. I'm ignoring it. Just let him take her out, then send your guys in to clean up the mess and grab the bag. It's cleaner this way." Amanda's own voice filled the silent penthouse, sealing her fate. She clamped her hands over her mouth, a muffled wail of terror escaping her lips. "Take her to the docks," Dominic ordered smoothly, not even looking at Amanda. "Put her on a freighter bound for Eastern Europe. She never sets foot in North America again. If she does, throw her in the Atlantic." Silvio hauled the screaming, thrashing Amanda to her feet, and dragged her out of the penthouse. The heavy doors clicked shut, restoring the suffocating quiet. Clarice stood frozen, trembling violently. She had just witnessed the ruthless, terrifying power of Dominic Rousseau. With a single sentence, he had erased a woman from the continent. Dominic stepped closer to her, invading her space until she had to tilt her head up to look at him. "Derek is gone. Costa's men found his body in an alley yesterday. My men planted the empty duffel bag next to him. Costa thinks his own people betrayed him. The war is over before it even began." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope, pressing it gently into her hands. "What is this?" Clarice asked, her voice a fragile whisper. "A new passport, a new birth certificate, keys to a house in a gated community in San Diego, and a bank account with enough money to ensure you never have to work at a dental clinic again," Dominic said, his dark eyes burning with an intense, conflicting emotion. "You are healed, Clarice. The people who hurt you are gone. You are free." Clarice stared at the envelope. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. Freedom, safety, a fresh start far away from the violence and the rain of Boston. She looked up at the towering, lethal man standing in front of her, a man who dealt in blood and shadows, but who had carried her broken body out of a nightmare, who had treated her with more respect and care than any man in her life ever had. She realized then that the gilded cage wasn't a prison. It was a fortress. Slowly, deliberately, Clarice dropped the manila envelope onto the coffee table. Dominic's breath hitched, a rare break in his absolute control. "What are you doing?" "San Diego is too sunny," Clarice murmured, taking a bold step forward, closing the final inch between them. She rested her hands flat against his broad, solid chest, feeling the heavy, rapid beating of his heart beneath his sweater. "And I don't think I'd sleep very well without my security detail." A slow, devastating smirk spread across Dominic's face, the first genuine smile she had ever seen him wear. It transformed him from a terrifying crime lord into a breathtakingly handsome man. He wrapped his powerful arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him, mindful of her ribs. "Once you make this choice, Clarice," Dominic whispered fiercely, his lips hovering mere millimeters from hers, "there is no walking away. You are mine, forever." "I typed the wrong number, Dominic," she breathed, rising onto her tiptoes, "but it was the right man." When his lips finally crashed down on hers, it was a collision of fire and darkness, a fierce, undeniable claim that sealed their fates together. The broken girl from the Barrens was gone. In her place stood the queen of the Boston underworld, standing untouchable beside the devil who had saved her life. Did this mafia romance leave you breathless? If you love the dark twists, the intense chemistry between Clarice and Dominic, and the shocking betrayal, smash that like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling real-life story. Share this video with your friends who love a bad boy who protects his girl. Drop a comment below